Hello, I'm Tim Waskett. I live in the UK. I've been making games for about 7 years now, and I like to do it as a hobby. I have no intention of doing it as a career, but you never know. Well, my background is in programming. I sort of fell into that through my work. I learned to do C# programming probably a decade ago now, and I've been doing that professionally for a while. I guess I primarily see myself as a programmer, but I quite like the design part of game development as well. I find it really interesting coming up with new mechanics and putting things together and to build a world and stuff like that. So I guess I'd consider myself a designer programmer at this point. That's probably the closest thing.
And so in the use of C# that you use in your work, it's predominantly is related to astronomy type things, I think, or physics.
Yeah, so well, that's my original background is astronomy. I did a degree and a PhD in astronomy long time ago now. I was an academic for probably 5 or 6 years before deciding that I wasn't a very good academic, and I ended up getting a real job, so they say in the academic circles. So I've not actually been an academic for well over a decade now. But so I sort of did various types of programming as an academic, but it was mostly sort of, image processing and signal processing and that sort of stuff in some very esoteric languages. But when I left academia, I actually joined an energy company in the UK and started to write mathematical models in C#. So I basically picked up C# for that job, and I've been using it ever since, really. So it's mostly kind of data processing, modeling of any sort of mathematical systems and that sort of stuff. That's what got me into the C#. From there, I basically stayed as a programmer ever since.
At what point did something trigger for you, even like in your first game programming stuff? Did you run into a tutorial you saw just on the internet? Did a friend mention it? Did you just kind of go searching for it actively? When or how did you just start making games as a hobby?
So I've been playing games for years and years and years, and always interested me how they were made, but I never really sort of pursued it at all, really, until when I had got my first sort of proper job, probably 2010 or so. The job that I had was a little bit unstable. I was hoping that it would be a bit more stable than it was, and it turned out that our company got bought out quite soon after I joined, which was a bit of a shock. At that stage, it's a case of, well, what's going to happen to my job and to my team and everything else. So I basically started to think about what I might do as a backup plan, just in case my job fell through. By coincidence, this was around about the time that mobile gaming was becoming a really big thing.
Kind of 08, 09, maybe a little later?
Yes, about around about then, about 2009, something like that. And I was reading an article on the BBC News website in one of my lunch breaks, and it was one of these. They were doing the rounds at the time. There were dozens of them all over the place. These small teams of people or individuals who'd made a game on iOS or something like that. And
Flight Control and Trism, and there were lots of these kind of stories of like one person team makes it big.
Yeah, exactly. They were all over the place. I guess that was the big thing then. It was like, this new thing that was everybody was making a million quid out of making these little games. And I was thinking, you know what? I can program. Surely it can't be that hard to make a video game, as you do when you're that sort of naive. And so I started to look into it at that point, and I thought, well, I know C#, and I know that Android is based on Java, and Java's not that dissimilar to C#. The basic structure is kind of the same. Syntax is pretty similar. There's a few sort of small differences, but I thought that it wouldn't be too big a jump to go from C# that I was comfortable with to Java. So I basically downloaded the Android SDK, looked at a load of example projects. There was they had an example project. I think it was like the old Moonlander game, where you had to pilot a little moon lander down onto the surface of the moon and hit a spot on the surface without crashing.
It's basically just kind of like thrust and angle versus gravity, right? Like there's no aliens, there's no cannons.
Exactly, that was it. So I thought, well, okay, I'll look at the code for that, and it seemed straightforward enough. And so I pulled it apart and started tinkering with it. And I really, really loved asteroids way back in the day. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a little space game. Space is kind of my thing, so that's the natural place to start. And I thought, this is going to be brilliant. I'm going to make an awesome little space game, and I'm going to sell it on the Google Play Store, and it's going to make £1 million, and I'm going to be rich, and I'm never going to have to work again, and all this stuff. And I imagine...
And that's exactly what happened.
Well, almost exactly, very close. So I started making this little game, and it took me much longer than I was expecting, but it was really fun.
Say much longer. Like let's just for ballpark. How long were you expecting? How long did you actually spend on it?
Oh, I thought it was going to take probably a couple of months, and I think I released the first version after a year.
Okay. To be clear, that's not full timing, right? This was still, you had a day job, you were nights or weekends kind of tinkering.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, an hour here and there, a couple of hours at the weekend, etc. So I think I estimated I put maybe 300 hours into making that game.
Okay.
In the first instance. But it was a nice little, kind of fun gravity-based game where you used your finger to create a black hole, which was the gravity by which your spaceship would fly around, effectively. So you'd move your black hole around, and the spaceship would get attracted towards your finger, and you could go into orbit and all this stuff. And I thought it was kind of neat. The people who liked it really liked it. But most people who played it just could not get the hang of the controls. And that was a massive eye-opener to me. I was like, surely everyone understands how gravity works. But it turns out that's not really the case. Watching people play it was like, oh man, this is so painful watching people play this game and sort of struggling to understand how the systems worked. And after I'd spent a year making it, it's a little bit soul-destroying, because you sort of think, well, I've poured my heart and soul into this, and you're just sort of not really understanding all this effort that I've put in. And it wasn't a particularly great game. It was a neat little game and had some fun mechanics in it. But when you compare it to what was coming out at the time, it was very basic, and clearly it didn't sell millions and millions of copies. I think I made about £100 out of it,
nice.
Which was it covered my costs for registering on the Play Store. And at that point, I thought, well, this isn't really worth trying to make money out of this, so I made it free from then on. And it went on to be downloaded well over 10,000 times, I think.
Nice.
Back at when it wasn't too super saturated, the marketplace was, there were games coming out every day, dozens of games, but it wasn't
still 5-6 years ago, right? In terms of
this was right. 7 or 8. About 6 years ago now. Yeah, it's got a lot worse since then. It was starting to get a little bit mad, but I hear it's got kind of way worse than that now.
For perspective, like some more recent projects you've worked on, right, are much bigger, totally different. And this could and just for context for listeners, like Tim and I know each other. We've worked together on projects now for several years, including some various kind of hobby games that you built now with teams that you're able to throw more months into. And so Clever Girls are one of the first one that comes to my mind, because that's when I just super like how it came out.
Oh man, yeah.
But it's so different in scope, scale, and everything from like the Gravity game. How do you like to explain Clever Girl to people?
Clever Girl was my first 3D game. And when I say 3D, I mean, not the virtual reality type of 3D.
3D models in Unity, XYZ coordinates.
Exactly. So everything I'd done up to that point was 2D. I'd made a few other 2D games after the space game. But Clever Girl was my first 3D game. And I just went in feet first, I thought I'm gonna pitch the best game that I can possibly imagine at the time, and I really like dinosaurs. I think they're brilliant. I really like bow and arrow mechanics, and I thought, well, you know what? I really like time travel as well, so I'm going to throw all of these together, and I'm going to send a time traveler back in time, crashes her time capsule in the prehistoric past. Has to venture out into the wilderness to retrieve the various broken bits of her time machine so that she can repair it. And the only thing she's managed to build to defend herself is a handmade bow and arrow. So off she goes, roaming around the landscape, getting attacked by dinosaurs, fending them off with this bow and arrow, trying to find the bits of her time machine, which she eventually retrieves and makes it back to her time machine, repairs it, and heads back to the future, as it were. So that was it. That was the sort of the elevator pitch, and that more or less is exactly how it came out.
I mean, mechanics wise, right, I think there were like a few different kind of arrow powers, like teleporting arrows, exploding arrows, maybe 5 or 6 different kind of dinos, stegosauruses, T-Rexes, velociraptors.
Yep, exactly. So this was a project I pitched in the one of your previous hobby game dev subreddits.
So
a few years ago.
And so for quick context for listeners, so this was I had only semi recently kind of like tucked and rolled out of graduate school. Is kind of how I described that process for me. I was I had been making games with a club out there that had got rolling. I had left grad school, and I missed club style game development. So I tried at first to get this online version thing going, which is kind of like what Gamkedo Club is now, but it was kind of figuring out how much can I get done here, if it's totally free, if it can't be my main objective, whatever. And just had the R Hobby Game Dev subreddit where people were pitching games together, building games together. Clever Girl is by far the biggest one to come out of that. For the most part, a lot of them were kind of 1 or 2 person, much smaller in scope things. But I think your team picked up, there was a bunch of modelers and...
I think it was 8 or 9.
8 or 9?
I suppose probably 10 if you include my wife, who did the voice for the main character.
I think voice talent counts.
Probably maybe 10 or 11 in the end, plus a couple of games testers. It came out so much better than I could have expected. The Hobby Game Dev subreddit came along at exactly the right time in my life when I was sort of looking for collaborative projects. I'd not really done anything collaborative up to that point. So it was ideal for me, really, and I jumped right in and thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to get all these talented artists and sound designers and everything. And amazingly, that's exactly what I got for Clever Girl. It was brilliant. I did the majority of the programming. I had another friend from back in my university days. He helped me out with the AI of the dinosaurs, but most of the kind of bread and butter of the gameplay was all me. But we had, I think, 2 really talented 3D artists. We had an amazing sound designer. He was great.
Was that James Hoffman?
So we had 2 composers, James Hoffman and Matthew Tucker-Roan, and a sound designer, Holver de Boer. He was outstanding. Everything just came out so well. To be fair, it did take a lot longer than I anticipated, and this seems to have become a thing with me. I pitched something which I think is going to take 2 or 3 months, and it ends up taking 5 months. Because the quality of the collaborators was so high, I felt that we really needed to kind of work through that and make it as good as it could be. So it ended up going from sort of a 3-month project to 5 months. But it came out so well, and it's still the most polished game I think I've ever been the lead on.
This is obviously a drum I bang on a bunch, but that you specifically, we were in the Hobby Game Dev subreddit. It's being pitched as this is not a commercial project. You're not trying to sell this. This is a practice thing for fun for everyone involved. I think it's part of what made this possible. In a way that, if you were trying to scrounge up a team to build a game to put on the App Store, to put on Steam, whatever, necessarily, you would have to, should be paying artists and musicians and other programmers and so on. No one was trying to make a kind of a business case out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great sort of breath of fresh air, really. It really gave you sort of creative freedom and didn't have to worry about the money side of things. It really helped to let you concentrate on being creative as opposed to having to worry about, is this going to be a high enough quality that we can make money?
Is there a market for this? How do we appeal to our demographic? For the first script that I wrote for Extra Credits, of course, one of the things that I mentioned was this one. I know a hobby game where the developer sent his wife back in time to fight dinosaurs. And it's because, to me, that's just such a lovely premise that, at no company could a case be made that, the main character is the lead developer's wife and she's going back in time to fight dinosaurs. You can't make a business product that way. But for your own game, of course, that's great.
Yeah, that was outstanding. My wife and I were watching the video together, and when it got to that bit, we just fell about laughing. It was so good, absolutely brilliant to be mentioned in an Extra Credits episode. I've been watching the Extra Credits channel for a long time. I've seen every video they've made, and I was super stoked to see that you were writing for them. And when we watched that video, it was great to get a little nod.
Well, and by the clever girl, and I think most listeners probably recognize. For those who don't, it's a reference right to the Jurassic Park phrase from the Hunter. Yes. Referring to velociraptors. And of course, obviously, double play with the character as well.
Yeah, I thought I was so clever when I came up with that name. I love Jurassic Park. I was probably, I'm trying to think now, maybe 12 or 13 when it came out. And it was just the best film ever as far as I was concerned. And it sort of stayed with me for a long, long time. And we actually watched it again recently, and it really holds up, actually. Oh, yeah. It's very, very high quality. That line, I think, is probably the standout line in the whole movie. And when I thought about making a game with dinosaurs in it and having the lead character as my wife, I thought, well, I have to call this Clever Girl, because I couldn't believe that nobody had used it before. I did a Google search, and there's like a band called Clever Girl, which that was about it, I think. And I thought, surely somebody else had used this for a game, but no, they hadn't. So I thought, well, I'll have that. That's perfect.
One question I might ask is, because I know lots of people wonder these sort of things. So you're doing it, and the games are getting like bigger and nicer and whatever, but you also identified very early on, like intro, right, that you want to keep it as a hobby, that you're not really interested in it becoming the career. What are some considerations around like why that is? Early
on, I thought, yeah, I'd love to make games as a career. That'd be great. And I never say never, certainly, but at the moment I've got a decent job and it pays pretty well, and I can make the games for fun as a creative outlet, as something to do in my spare time. And I've met some great people, and it's it's really fun to make something that people enjoy. I really like that. I guess casual is not really the right word, because it's we're obviously putting a lot of work into these games, but it's a bit more friendly, I suppose. As soon as you hear all these stories of small studios, not really making much money, and they're really struggling, and they go into it for the love, but they end up having to leave because they have to pay the rent and all this other stuff. And I thought, well, I don't really want that hassle at the moment. I think I'd rather keep going as I am. If the opportunity presents itself and I'm in the right place in my life, then sure, why not? I'll give it a go. I'm never afraid to try something new. But at this point in my life, keeping it as a hobby is the right thing for me, and I'm thoroughly enjoying doing it that way.
Gotcha. Now, so one of the thoughts because I know a lot of our listeners are like a lot of them have programming day jobs unrelated to games. Part of what they wonder about is like, what's the gap like going from programming for whether it's backends, whether it's data analysis, image processing, whatever. How did you feel shifting from non-game programming towards game programming?
Well, it's a very different way of thinking, actually. What I do with my day job is, processing data and angling data into sensible shapes and plotting it and all that stuff. You sort of don't really worry too much about performance. If it runs in a sensible time, fine. That's all good. But with games, you kind of that's always in the back of your mind. I've only got a few milliseconds to do this stuff, and I've got to spread it out. If I want to do a big long calculation, I need to spread it out over multiple time steps and that sort of stuff. The fact that everything has to happen in tiny little increments is a very different way of thinking. And it was quite refreshing, actually. It's almost like two totally different things. I find that when I'm programming my day job and when I'm programming on my video game projects, they don't really overlap in many ways in terms of mental capacity I need to use for them. It's a sort of different type of thinking, and I find that quite refreshing, actually. So even though I program most of my day, I will still do programming on my game in the evening or at weekends. It doesn't drain me in the same way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good thing for people to hear, because oftentimes I know lots of folks who they're worried about, like, I program 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week for the boss or for the company or the whatever, and am I going to be too drained on programming to program my own projects? And like you're saying, it's exercising a different way of thinking, a different approach, a different set of concerns.
There's other things you can do as well. It's not, if I'm burned out with programming or whatever, then I can do a little bit of 3D modeling or, tinkering with design or whatever. So, there's always something else you can be doing.
Speaking of it, that's also one of the things that, and partly is because, I go back to it because it's what I've always been kind of advocating for, like, hobby game development's great. But also you specifically identify as like hobby is what you want to be doing. Like, that's also part of what makes it possible for you to just be like, you know what, I'm going to take a break and make some 3D models or do some design stuff. In a way that if it's a professional project, it's like, no, the person who's specialized in that gets to do it. No one else gets to do it. But here, like, any piece you feel like you want to make sounds today, you can make sounds today because it's yours.
Yeah. And it's quite therapeutic as well. I quite enjoy the 3D modeling just from, tinkering with vertices and, pulling them around and stuff. It's a very sort of therapeutic way of passing the time in some respects.
Kind of sculpting of sorts. And you're using Blender, right?
Yes. Yeah. Blender is the sort of de facto free modeling package. It's very, very powerful. Lots to it, and very steep learning curve. But once you sort of get the basics, it's not too bad.
Especially for just game models, where especially the kind of the hobbyist scale, personal project scale, I find my objective is often just, can I make it resemble the shape I'm going for? Like, I'm not, I'm not a full-time Maya animator making a CGI film or whatever. So like, I'm not really lost in how do I execute something with really, really fine grain, high fidelity, perfect joints, whatever. And for Blender, I find, even though it can be an incredibly complex tool, with a pretty small subset of what Blender can do, I can make the shape I'm trying to get out of it to build a chair, build a shed, build a character, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's why when I first started to look into 3D modeling, I thought, well, what can I conceivably achieve given my skill set? And I'm not an artist by any stretch. I'm reasonably competent at pulling geometric shapes around and stuff. And I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll try low poly modeling because there's fewer things that can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The aesthetic is reasonably straightforward to achieve to a level that doesn't look too bad.
Right.
Obviously, there's a huge difference between good low poly modeling and bad low poly modeling, but it's much more achievable for someone like me who's primarily a programmer to achieve something that looks vaguely decent quality when sort of tackling a low poly model as opposed to something super high fidelity like you're saying. I don't need to worry about really detailed textures or whatever. I can make it flat shaded, and that saves a lot of time. It was sort of my approach to doing programmer art, I suppose, but in a way that doesn't make it look really, really bad.
Now, so speaking of both, kind of tying together two topics of one, low poly modeling, the other performance considerations. So your most recent game, Sunbeam, which is coming out pretty soonish, at least the initial release version, is one which. So, do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because I know it had some specific technical challenges for performance.
Yeah, so Sunbeam was a fun project to be working on. Actually, with every project I do, I try and think, well, what is it I'd like to learn how to do in this project? So, Sunbeam was a concept that I came up with based on a small world. I've seen small world games before, and I like the concept. I think it's great. And I thought, well, if I make a small world, the whole thing's basically self-contained. I've got good control over everything. I'm not ending up with a sprawling, huge, great landscape that I need to fill up.
Not like your previous game, which had infinite landscape.
Yeah. So the previous game was an attempt to understand procedural generation, and it was a flight sim, and it worked reasonably well. Sunbeam was as kind of to go in the opposite direction and say, right, let's do everything hand built, low poly to keep the performance reasonable. And I really like first-person puzzle games, so I've been playing a lot of games like The Witness, the Talos Principle, even games like Numa Breath of Life. That was a neat little game that came out last year. And I like the sort of first-person, logic-based puzzle games.
Kind of lineage of Myst, but the real-time kind of stuff anymore.
That's right, yeah. So, sort of exploring around on an island or some sort of contained environment where you discover various puzzles that you can solve by either moving things around or, like in The Witness, you trace a line through a maze, that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, if I'm on a small planet, I've got the sun in the sky, if I walk around the planet, then obviously the sun changes angle in the sky. What if I had a mechanic which involved rotating the sky around, or rotating the planet, I suppose, if you're depending on your frame of reference. But imagine the sun, being able to control the angle of the sun in the sky. The logical thing is to use a mirror to bounce light around and make some sort of puzzle game out of that. So that was the basic premise of the game. And I then tried to expand that to fill an entire planet's worth of puzzles, basically.
A little bit like, I think I've seen long ago pictures of Egyptians building the pyramids, whatever, with long mirror cascades, or Indiana Jones depicts this stuff where there's like a window of sunlight activating something.
Yeah.
And it's kind of these kind of puzzles and concepts.
Yes. So basically you're using reflected sunlight to power mechanisms and open gates and other things that allow you to progress through the world. So starting with the premise of rotating the planet, I thought, well, I'm going to have to build up to that, really. I'm not going to just throw the player in and say, right, here you go, move the planet around and bounce this light around to solve these puzzles.
When you say like rotating the planet, like it's not like it's turning like on a day-night cycle naturally. The player literally, right, is rotating the whole globe relative to the sun.
That's exactly right. The sun will stay fixed in the sky until the player moves the sky around. And the mechanism I chose to do that was a sundial. So when the player encounters a sundial, they can interact with the sundial and move the sky around so that the sun is at a different angle. That was it, really. That was all I had initially. And I thought, well, I can't make a whole load of puzzles based on that. So I worked backwards from that. And I thought, well, if I'm rotating the sky, well, I can build other things that I can rotate. So I can rotate maybe buildings or pedestals or, solar panels and mirrors and things like that. So basically, I decided that I could build an entire game just from rotating things and tilting things. That was it. That's it, basically.
Right. So there's no push puzzles. There's no levers and switches.
No, exactly. So it's basically anything you interact with, you can either rotate or tilt.
The other half of that equation, right, is that your solar panels are the things you're activating or deactivating or whatever by the targets exactly. Of the light.
That's right. So the solar panels are connected to various gates and other mechanisms that allow you to progress. The whole premise of solving the puzzles is to try and direct the light onto the solar panels to unlock the gates and be able to progress through the world.
Part of the performance challenge, right, is that these mirrors, like you wanted to show actual reflections.
Yes.
Which was already an entire planet full of polygons. And there's multiple mirrors that occasionally are facing each other.
Yep.
And so you've got all kinds of level of detail, mirrors shut off, backface calling, other trickery going on, right?
Oh man, I had no idea it was going to be this complicated when I started.
I think you said it's like you figured out why Talos Principle uses lasers.
This is exactly it. So I really like Talos Principle. It's an excellent game, and they use lasers to power up their mechanisms. And I thought, wow, lasers! Everyone uses lasers. I can do something a bit different here. I thought, yeah, mirrors, that'd be great. I can use mirrors, and I can have lovely reflections and volumetric light and all this stuff, and it will look beautiful. I did a little prototype, and I made a mirror, and I got the reflections working, and it was awesome. And I thought, yeah, this is going to be great. And then I started adding them to the planet, and I suddenly had huge numbers of polygons rendering. I was thinking, this is odd. And then it occurred to me, I was thinking, of course, every single mirror is effectively another camera rendering everything that it can see, as well as the camera that the player is looking through. And so therefore, every mirror that you add is effectively doubling the number of polygons that you're rendering. And this was a bit of a shock to me. Stupidly, I knew this already because you can see the same effect whenever you use reflective water in Unity. Right. As soon as you add water, you effectively double the poly count. I'd noticed that in previous games, but for some reason I didn't put two and two together and realized that having all these mirrors is going to cause me a problem.
Even in relatively recent AAA games, you'll walk into a bathroom in a first-person shooter, and the mirror is like cracked and smashed off the wall so you can't see your reflection. And right. I like they're trying to hide from them that like if we showed you a mirror, your frame rate would drop below 60 and we couldn't have like shipped this game on this console or whatever.
You try these things and you sort of don't really necessarily anticipate every problem that you're going to have. But, when you do encounter a problem, you've got to solve it, right? So this is exactly what you were saying before. You have to start to decide when you're going to have the mirror actually active. And so I've got various little bits of code that run to check the distance between the mirror and the player. So whenever the player is more than 50 meters away from the mirror effectively turns off. Whenever the player is behind the mirror, so you can't see the face of it, the mirror turns off and all that stuff. So basically trying not to put too many mirrors too close together and these little tricks to make sure that the mirrors are only on when they're absolutely necessary. And that just about keeps things under control. Doing those little tricks makes the game playable just about.
I really like that these are cases where like there's these little applied math problems of even just detecting, is this mirror pointing towards me or away? And, all these kind of things that in math classes have to be so abstract, including like when and why am I going to use this? And in game programming, it's like literally, well, without this, my game's 15 frames a second. People will, not want to play this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think my favorite mathematical formula is the dot product. For those who are interested in vector maths, it's that is your friend in game programming. So yeah, learn the dot product. So it's the single piece of advice I can ever give.
My first summer out with AAA, we had this thing where like, okay, when the player looks at a secondary objective, it should pulse this shader. And so the first thing I did was I threw a raycasting line just straight in front of the player's nose to detect, am I looking at a thing? Is that thing a secondary objective? And the lead programmer is like, well, to improve performance, before you raycast, do some dot products on the camera's frustum or whatever to figure out, is there any chances in front of us? And that obliterates a ton of the probability a bunch of the time, and that those things add up. And it just seemed like, well, but the raycast does it. But raycasts are slow compared to a dot product, which is kind of infinitely fast on a computer.
A dot product is so cheap to run. It's it's a couple of multiplications. That's it. It's brilliant.
Yep. Yeah, a couple multiplications, couple additions, which in modern processing time is literally one of the. I mean, nothing could be faster than that.
Yep, absolutely trivial calculation. Yeah, use it whenever you can. I use it all the time.
Nice. And so in terms of its design, right, like the whole planet's divided up into hexagons, like kind of soccer ball-ish.
Yep. So it's a dodecahedron, a 12-sided regular.
But a rounded dodecahedron, isn't it? It's not
Yes,
like the planet's
right.
like a D&D die.
That's right. Yeah. So it's like exactly as you say. It's like a soccer ball. It's like you've inflated a dodecahedron. So yeah, the planet is curved, obviously, to make it a bit more realistic and all that. But that actually wasn't the original design. I went into it thinking, well, this is going to be a low poly planet. I can do the whole thing in one mesh. This is going to be fine. No problem at all.
Just a big old Blender model mesh collider.
That's exactly it. Yeah, one big mesh. You can just pull these around, make a nice little landscape. But I quickly realized that actually that's going to make it very, very difficult to have multiple people, designing each segment of each part of the planet. And I was doing sort of a lot of the sculpting early on in the project, and thinking this is going to take me the entire project just to create the landscape, and I'm going to have no time to do anything else. So I had to rethink it quite early on. Within probably the first 2 or 3 weeks, I started to break it down into pieces, and this is when I thought of, well, if I make it a dodecahedron, I've got 12 segments that will naturally form separate areas on the planet, which I can then hand off to different people, different collaborators to sculpt those areas, and then each part can be the basis of a set of puzzles, and I can introduce different mechanics on each biome, I ended up calling them, because that seems to be what everyone calls these things, and I can effectively theme each area to have a different sort of environment. So you've got like Arctic area, obviously near the North and South Poles, and I've got a jungle and a desert and a swamp area and things like that. So that gives you a bit more structure then, and helps guide the sort of puzzle design process as well, because you can use the different types of landscape to create different types of puzzles. And that really appealed to me. So once we were on that track, everything became a lot more straightforward in terms of design.
Is Nick Baker doing some of the level design? I'm not sure if anybody else is involved in laying out some of those biomes or.
So Nick Baker, one of the club members, he jumped on board. He was keen to do some sculpting of the terrain, and he's actually ended up doing pretty much all of it, which has been outstanding. It's really, really freed me up to do the puzzle design and the other sort of stuff involved with making sure that the game feels okay to play and stuff.
And so he would do the landscape, like the marsh or whatever, and then you would add puzzles on top of it?
Exactly, okay. Yeah. So actually that became a very good workflow. In fact, I had some vague ideas of the sort of type of puzzles that I wanted to add, but they were fairly embryonic and nothing concrete at all. But having a landscape handed to you without really pushing too much of your own opinion onto it was actually quite beneficial from the creation side of things, because I would get this new piece of landscape and I would look at it and I think, okay, I've got all these interesting shapes I can use. That then allows you as a puzzle designer to think, well, what puzzles would fit in these different landscapes? And it gives you much more of I guess it gives you the canvas against which you can compose your puzzles.
It's like an architect being able to think about, like, how do I set something into this hill or build around this view or whatever, and having some constraint can simplify it, right?
Oh, it really helps, actually. It's an amazing effect that having a constraint can actually be very beneficial for the creative process.
It's actually something that I'd read a long time ago from an interview with Martin Hollis, producer of GoldenEye for N64, that apparently that was a bunch of their level design process for N64 or GoldenEye, where the modelers would kind of build out the map space without a real clear plan on ambush points, item locations, bad guys, whatever, and then the level designers would just kind of like populate it and build a level out of it. And it was sort of this disconnect from, okay, make something that architecturally reflects the movie, has some kind of nice vignette spaces, and then they kind of levelized it, combat points as opposed to puzzles. But it is this interesting workflow between creating that space and then doing something with it. And I really also like like in your case, it emerged from the process of you need to be able to parallelize that work. But like you mentioned, it really also, I think, helps segment the space for player understanding of it, of like, okay, each location's connected to X number of other locations. I remember I need to go somewhere to do something in the desert or do something in the snowy trees.
Yes, yeah. So the original plan was to have a very sort of free-form, open environment, a bit like The Witness. I've been playing The Witness sort of a few months previously, and it was sort of fresh in my mind. And that's an incredible game. I'm not the game designer that Jonathan Blow is, so
no one is. That's all right.
I suspect I was probably bitten off more than I could chew at that stage. So I thought to myself, well, you know what? There's no shame in having a slightly more linear and controlled progression through a game. So I took that route instead and decided that I would make sure that I could teach the player the relevant mechanics in the correct sequence, so that they solve one puzzle after another. And with any luck, the knowledge that they gain from the earlier puzzles will stay with them, so that they can then solve the later puzzles, which become increasingly more complex. Once I realized that I was allowed to make a reasonably linear sequence of puzzles, that made the design process a lot simpler. But it's still an open world, and once you do solve puzzles, you open up connections between the various segments that you've already visited, so you can go back and explore around and stuff like that.
Well, that's something that I see a lot of game developers will kind of hang on to as what they feel like is like in a very essential, unavoidable fashion. Like, games have to be branching, games have to be played in any order, whatever. And like, I don't buy it. I think lots of games I've enjoyed a lot are frankly like a pretty curated sequence of things to happen, puzzles where I know that by the time it's being shown to me, I'm adequately prepared for it. A bunch of what, like, for all the benefits of these more open world, sprawling, branching kind of designs, for all the benefits of them, is also this major downside of everything I'm doing. I'm like, am I in the wrong place right now? Was I not supposed to be here yet? Am I missing something entirely? Is just sort of this like uncomfortable point that for some games is fine, but isn't always what you're going for.
Yeah, exactly. I think Portal was a great example of that sort of progression of puzzle mechanics, sort of fed to the player drip by drip, so that they understood everything before they moved on to the more complex stuff. I think that's probably more the style that I've ended up going for in this particular case. But yeah, that's a perfectly valid way of designing a video game, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, and I think super one of the Paper Mario RPGs that I played long ago on Wii had the same effect of, like, by the time you get to a puzzle, they've kind of just primed you with what the solution's going to be, and you feel clever. Because, like, oh, I made this connection, but, like, they kind of set you up for it, and it allows you to. I know you've been doing playtesting where other people in the club will play it and video record it, send you the video recording so you can review it, but it allows you to, like, kind of have, if you spot someone that's frustrated somewhere, you know where, you have an idea what the experience is going to be like, and you can refine that in a way that's probably going to impact a high percentage of players, as opposed to, like, I don't know, they have to design, like, 8 or 9 different possible pathways through it. It's just a much larger pipeline and time of development to accommodate.
Yeah. I mean, the playtesting has been absolutely fascinating and really eye-opening. In fact, when I first sort of blocked out all the various puzzles, I thought, yeah, these are perfectly logical, and people are going to understand these, no problem. It's going to be great. And then you watch the first couple of videos come in, and you think to yourself, how are these people not getting it? This is crazy.
What's wrong with my players?
Yes. And you've got to realize that it's not the player's fault. Obviously, they're looking at it through completely fresh eyes. They don't understand the thought process that you went through when you were designing these puzzles, so they don't know exactly what you're aiming for. And it's really quite interesting how different players will stumble at different points. So the thing that I wasn't expecting when I started getting these playtest videos back was some people would sail through the first half of the game. They'd get to one puzzle, they'd get a little bit stuck, they'd eventually figure it out, and they'd move on, and then they'd sail through the last part of the game. Other people would come to the bit that first player got stuck on and sail through that without any trouble, and then get stuck on the last puzzle. And you think, well, okay, why is one player getting stuck on one part and another player getting stuck on a different part? And you've got to realize that actually it's your fault as the puzzle designer. They probably lucked out to a certain extent. If they solved the puzzle, it's probably not because you taught them anything clever and gave them the tools to solve the puzzle. They probably just sort of stumbled through it and accidentally solved the puzzle. So what you've got to try and figure out is, what is it that I've got to teach, and how do I teach it in a way that doesn't feel like you're teaching it? And that's incredibly hard to do. I was not really prepared for that level of thought to go into designing these sorts of puzzles. So that's been a very eye-opening experience for me as trying to make a puzzle game.
Well, when people are stumbling through different points, of course, you start to kind of just have to guess. There's some probability. Like, some people might sail through all of it. Some people may get stuck on literally every single piece.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's almost like when this, mention used to be in academia, and obviously I had my little stint there as well. Like, if half the class or more isn't getting something, it's a sign of, like, the ones who got it may not have got it from the teaching. They may have known it from the outside. They may have gotten lucky. They may have whatever. You got to suspect, how do I change what I'm doing to fill in the ones who don't get it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a massive kick to the ego as well when somebody is struggling with a puzzle you've designed. You think, well, what do I have to do to make you understand this puzzle? It's not that hard, but it's only not that hard because you designed it, right?
Right.
You can design the world's most complicated puzzle, and you find it terribly easy. And that's I often wonder if it would be quite cool to be able to sort of switch your own memories off in some respects, so that you could play your own game without having any of the knowledge of how you built it.
For a long time, I had a hard time getting myself to do game testing because I would think, like, I've spent 10 years doing this. I've learned as much as I can about the craft. I read about it, listen to interviews, I study it, I practice it, whatever. What are they going to know? Who doesn't know this game, isn't even a developer. And like, the most important thing is, like, it's what they don't know. It's that they haven't seen every step of this game through its development. They haven't played earlier versions. They didn't design the darn puzzles. And that's something that no amount of experience can compensate for. Like, if you made it, you do know all the answers, and you can't get fresh eyes. That's not something you can do with experience.
It's incredibly humbling, actually, watching playtests, whether it's in person or on video. It's not something you can prepare yourself for, really. Yeah, very, very humbling. And I thoroughly recommend it. If you don't playtest, you're very likely to find that your game is poorer for it. Playtest as much as you can. Everyone says it, but it really is true.
Especially, I find what happens, and sometimes you even find this in the first round of playtesting before you can even get to real playtesting, is there will just be things where, like, for 90% of players, they can't get the game started, or they can't get past the first room, or there's some, like, really bizarre hang-up early on that until that's even addressed, you can't even get deeper testing in some cases.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when they don't do playtesting, they'll release something out in the wild and be like, why are my stars so low? Why is it not getting more plays? Why are people not return? Why, whatever. And it's often because, like, it's just, like, there's a fundamental action. Like, they don't know they can double jump, or they don't know they can, whatever it is. Without that, they're just hosed and just assume like this isn't doable.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can assume when you're developing a game that people just won't get or will miss or whatever. So you've got to really pay attention to the playtesters to find out what it is that you're not describing properly, because it can really spoil somebody's enjoyment of a game if they simply don't understand a mechanic.
And so Sunbeam, it's being developed in Unity, so it's going to be playable on Mac, PC, and Linux. And it's a project being made in Gamkedo Club, so it's totally free.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
No in-app transactions. No,
nothing like that.
No price tag. No ads running.
Goodness me, no.
If you want the solution to the puzzle after you're stuck for 3 minutes.
That's. Well, I suspect if that was the case, there'd be some people who get stuck for much longer than 3 minutes. But not that I want to put people off. But
right. And part of the unfortunate side effect of those things is that it leads us to, like, design slightly more frustrating puzzles if we're incentivized financially.
Oh wow! Yes, I hadn't even thought of that.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of Candy Crush that's, I think, statistically designed to get you just frustrated enough to pay them.
Ooh, that's brutal.
It's effective, as a business priority, whatever. But yeah, it's a nice thing that when you don't have that, you can build it so it's playable, so they see all the content, so they can get through it, so they have a smooth experience. And what's the release date on it? And which like we say, it doesn't mean you may have some patches afterwards or whatever. But first release?
So first release Sunday the 23rd of April. So
in 2017, in case someone's listening to this way in the future.
Yeah. Yes. Well, if you're listening to it way in the future, hopefully the game is out by now.
Right.
With any luck.
Right. So in closing, the other thing I always like to end on, like, obviously we mentioned several already in terms of, like, playtest. But is there some sort of major advice you'd like to share for anybody getting started who'd like to make games, the kind of games you make, or kind of the scale, scope, whatever that you're doing?
Well, I guess the thing to do is to know what it is you like to play, because it's making a game that you would want to play, I think, is really key. If you've got the passion to make a game, it should be something that's fun for you to do, to build as well as play. And there are loads of resources out there to help you get started. I mean, you've got your Code Your First Game, which is a great place to start.
CodeYourFirstGame.com.
Yep, that's right. I really wish that had been around when I first started making games, because I was stumbling around for a long time. I got there in the end, but it was a very sort of stop and start, and pulling things together off of various parts of the internet. And it's taken me a long time to get to this stage, and I bet I could have got here a lot quicker if I'd if I'd done something a little bit more structured. But that's how it worked out for me. Everyone will take a different route, but you've got to find what works for you, I guess.
Yep. Well, and then the other thing is any sort of Twitter handles, websites, etc., where they can find more of your projects, follow you online.
So yeah, my Twitter, I go under the handle of Stone Baked Games. So as in Stone Baked Pizza, but for games.
And baked past tense, right? BAKED.
Baked, yes. Stone and then BAKED, then games. Yep. So I'm at Stone Baked Games on Twitter. I'm also on itch.io, which is where all of my current projects are hosted. So that's stone-baked-games.itch.io. If you're interested in a little bit of the backstory of where I've come from and a little bit of a write-up on each of the games, I've also got a website which is stonebakedgames, all one word, .co.uk for those who are interested in looking at some of the other stuff that I've done as well.
All right, thanks so much for taking time for the interview today, Tim.
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me. It's been great.
So Tim's really worked on a lot of cool stuff. And I want to add, too, his games are really a lot of fun. Like, I encourage you to check out his stonebakedgames.co.uk website. You can actually also find that now in Gamkedo.club. We have a members section on the site with a number of club member portfolios. So you can more easily find links to Tim's games, check out more information about the games he's worked on right there from Gamkedo.club. That's Gamkedo.club. Now, speaking of which, one of the things that Tim mentioned was that he, of course, took a long time in terms of cobbling together all the resources he could find on the web. Feels like he probably could have got there a lot sooner, a lot faster, a lot less pain if Gamkedo, in terms of our codeyourfirstgame.com course, our club support structure and so on, had been around when he got started. You can find out more about how to join us at Gamkedo.club. We really do have a process where you don't need any sort of background, you don't need any sort of experience. We can help you get ramped up, help you get started, help you get plugged in immediately into teams. The Sunbeam game coming out is actually, I think, maybe the 6th, 7th, or 8th club game that Tim Waskett now has had his hands in. We all kind of help each other out on our projects, and so it's a great chance to meet more developers, network with more developers. Another thing that Tim had mentioned was that it's really important to identify what kind of game you want to work on, what kind of game you enjoy playing, and that helps keep the motivation a lot higher. And this is actually a part of why Gamkedo Club exists, because part of what I found was after my second video course, I've got the 2 video courses, we've got codeyourfirstgame.com, there's a follow-up course, which, by the way, club members get access to as part of their membership. But as part of the club, it's a chance for people to learn by building the kind of games that interest them, and in a way that is often beyond the scope or the means of what one person working alone can do. If part-timing it in a reasonable chunk of time, it's something that we're able to knock out in just a few months working together, games that working solo would easily take a year, 2 years plus, and really kind of slows things down. In contrast, instead, getting experience on half a dozen games, sort of no time at all. So anyway, check us out there. I also want to mention, if you've ever checked out Gamkedo.club and decided that it seems like it might be a good fit, but maybe the dues are outside your present means, we have a new Patreon set up. It's patreon.com/Gamkedo. They've helped sponsor members. And what this is all about is that we know that there's people out there who they'd be a great fit for the club in terms of being involved, being active, learning, growing, practicing alongside the rest of us and with us. And if it's outside your means, in terms of the member dues, you can actually now apply for a sponsored position. So there's a limited number of these. There is an application process, but the application is free and short. And really, if it's something you think might be a fit, I encourage you to go ahead and apply. You can find that just go to Gamkedo.club. That's Gamkedo.club. And then there's a Patreon button we've added. Click on that in the top right of the page. It'll take you down to a description about what the sponsored membership is, how it works, as well as a link to the forum, which really just has a few questions about kind of your background, what you want to do in the club, and so on. But the questions and the character counts, keep it short. I didn't want anybody out there having to write long essays or anything. But so check that out if you're interested in making games with Tim and I and the dozens of other developers from around the globe we've pulled together to learn together, to build projects together, and I hope we get to make some games with you in the future. Music at the start and end of this podcast is provided by Danny Baranowski, used with permission.